It didn't happen. Presence tied to one of the most successful daytime shows in television history. And then, suddenly, she wasn't. There was no grand farewell that matched the scale of her career. No extended goodbye that audiences had grown used to seeing from major figures in entertainment. Instead, what followed felt unusually quiet. Reports began surfacing that she had left the United States altogether, relocating overseas and distancing herself from the Hollywood environment she had been part of for decades. What made this even more intriguing wasn't just the move itself, but the timing surrounding it. The decision appeared to come just as conversations about high-profile investigations tied to powerful individuals were starting to re-enter public discourse. For many observers, that overlap created a sense that something bigger might be happening behind the scenes. Of course, there are always multiple explanations for a celebrity choosing to step away. Personal reasons, lifestyle changes, or even a desire for privacy after years in the spotlight. But in situations like this, where the exit is sudden and the context is already filled with unanswered questions, people naturally begin to look deeper. The idea that someone at that level would walk away so abruptly raises a different kind of curiosity. Not necessarily because there is confirmed evidence of wrongdoing, but because high-profile exits rarely happen without layers of reasoning beneath the surface. In Hollywood, where public image is carefully managed and every move is often calculated, a quiet departure can feel louder than a public statement. It leaves gaps in the story, and those gaps are exactly where speculation begins to grow. And that's what turned this moment into something more than just a celebrity relocation. It became the starting point of a larger narrative, one where timing, silence, and unanswered questions all intersect. Whether coincidence or not, the way it unfolded made people stop and ask a simple but powerful question. Why now? Timing in itself doesn't prove anything, but it can change how people interpret events. In this case, the timeline surrounding Ellen's departure quickly became one of the most talked about aspects of the story. As renewed attention began forming around the broader network connected to Jeffrey Epstein, public interest started rising again. Old discussions resurfaced, new documents were being referenced, and conversations about who might have been connected began spreading across media and online platforms. It was during this exact period that Ellen's long-running show came to an end. Officially, the conclusion of the show was tied to internal controversies and criticism about workplace culture. That alone could have explained the decision to step away. However, when combined with her reported relocation and complete withdrawal from public life, the situation began to feel more layered. For some, it seemed like multiple events were overlapping in a way that felt too precise to ignore. What makes timing so powerful in shaping narratives is that it doesn't need confirmation to influence perception. People naturally try to connect dots, especially when dealing with figures who have operated at the highest levels of influence. The human instinct is to search for patterns, to understand whether events are isolated or part of something larger. And when two major developments happen side by side, a high-profile exit and a resurgence of a global scandal, it creates a narrative tension that's difficult to overlook. At the same time, it's important to recognize that correlation does not automatically mean causation. There are countless examples where events align purely by coincidence, but in high-profile cases like this, coincidence alone often isn't enough to satisfy public curiosity. The lack of clear answers only adds to the intrigue, allowing different interpretations to take shape depending on who is analyzing the situation. This is where the story begins to shift from observable facts into open-ended questions. Not conclusions, not accusations, just questions. And those questions are what keep people watching, analyzing, and revisiting the timeline again and again, trying to understand whether what they're seeing is random or part of something more deliberate. One of the most widely accepted aspects of the Epstein case is that it extended far beyond a single individual. Investigations and court proceedings revealed that Ghislaine Maxwell played a significant role in facilitating and maintaining the system that Epstein operated within. Her conviction confirmed that there were structured efforts involving recruitment, coordination, and long-term planning. This alone established that the situation was not isolated, but rather part of a broader network. Understanding this changes the way people view everything connected to the case. It shifts the focus from individual actions to systemic involvement. If one person could not have operated alone, then the natural follow-up question becomes, how many others were involved and to what extent? While some names and details have been publicly confirmed, a large portion of the information remains either undisclosed or partially hidden. This creates an environment where the known facts coexist with significant unknowns. And it's within those unknowns that speculation tends to grow. The idea of a network, especially one connected to powerful individuals, introduces complexity that is difficult to fully map out from the outside. Even when official documents are released, they often contain redactions or incomplete information, leaving gaps that the public cannot easily fill. These gaps don't necessarily imply hidden guilt, but they do prevent a complete understanding of the situation. As a result, attention often shifts toward individuals who were part of the same broader environment, even if no direct connection has been established. In the case of Ellen, her long-standing presence in Hollywood naturally places her within the same general sphere as many other influential figures. That alone doesn't indicate involvement, but in the context of an already complex case, it's enough for people to start asking whether any connections exist beyond what is publicly known. This is how narratives evolve, not through confirmed evidence alone, but through the combination of facts, missing information, and the human tendency to seek clarity. The existence of a network ensures that the story remains open-ended, with each new detail potentially shifting the way everything else is interpreted. While official investigations provide one side of the story, public perception is often influenced by accounts and documented facts. They don't replace evidence, but they do influence perception. And in a case filled with uncertainty, perception can be just as powerful as proof. As the situation continued to unfold, another event added a layer of emotion and complexity that made the overall narrative even harder for people to ignore. The sudden death of Stephen Twitch Boss, who had been closely associated with Ellen's show for years, sent shockwaves through both fans and the entertainment industry. He wasn't just a background figure, he was a familiar, energetic presence, someone audiences had come to recognize as part of the show's identity. Official reports described a deeply personal struggle, pointing toward internal challenges that he had been facing. Stories emerged about the steps he took leading up to his death, painting a picture of someone dealing with pressures that were not fully visible to those around him. It was a tragic reminder of how mental health battles can remain hidden, even in individuals who appear outwardly positive and successful. However, in the environment that had already been shaped by unanswered questions and rising speculation, this tragedy didn't remain isolated in the public conversation. Instead, some people began connecting it to the broader narrative that had been forming around Ellen's departure and the resurfacing of discussions tied to powerful figures. The timing, once again, became the focal point, not because of confirmed links, but because of how closely these events seemed to follow one another. It's important to be clear that there is no verified evidence connecting his death to any of the larger theories being discussed. The official explanation remains rooted in personal circumstances, and that should be respected. But in the world of online speculation, emotional events often become intertwined with existing narratives, especially when they occur within the same circle of people. What this moment truly highlights is how quickly a story can evolve when multiple high-impact events happen within a short period. A personal tragedy becomes part of a larger conversation, not because of proven connections, but because of the human tendency to search for meaning in timing and proximity. And once that process begins, it becomes difficult to separate what is known from what is assumed. This is where the narrative grows more complex, balancing between empathy for a real loss and the curiosity driven by an already unfolding mystery. And for many viewers, it deepened the sense that there was still more beneath the surface that hadn't yet been fully understood. As more attention returned to the Epstein case, one of the most consistent themes was not what had been revealed, but what remained hidden. Despite years of investigations, court proceedings, and media coverage, a significant portion of the information tied to Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell is still not fully accessible to the public. Large collections of documents have been released over time, but many of them contain heavy redactions. Names are blacked out, details are removed, and entire sections are left incomplete. For those trying to understand the full scope of what happened, this creates a fragmented picture, one where certain pieces are visible, but the overall image remains unclear. This lack of transparency has become one of the driving forces behind ongoing speculation. When information is partially hidden, it naturally leads people to wonder what's being withheld and why. In cases involving powerful individuals, that question becomes even more significant because the stakes are higher and the potential impact is greater. Some believe that the redactions are simply part of legal processes designed to protect ongoing investigations or the privacy of individuals not formally charged. Others argue that the missing information could point to connections that have not yet been publicly addressed. Without full access to the data, both interpretations remain possible, and neither can be definitively proven from the outside. What's certain is that the incomplete nature of the available information leaves room for interpretation. It allows different narratives to form, each shaped by how individuals choose to fill in the gaps. For some, the absence of clarity is frustrating. For others, it's what keeps the story alive, fueling continued interest and discussion. In this context, any high-profile figure connected to the broader entertainment or social circles surrounding these events can become part of the conversation, even without direct evidence. Ellen's name, like many others, enters this space not because of confirmed involvement, but because of proximity to a world that is still not fully understood. And until more information becomes available, if it ever does, those unanswered questions will continue to shape how the entire story is perceived. In situations like this, silence can take on a meaning of its own. Since stepping away from her show and relocating, Ellen DeGeneres has largely remained out of the spotlight. There have been no extensive public statements addressing the theories circulating online, no detailed interviews breaking down her perspective on the timing more to the story than what is publicly known. This contrast in interpretation highlights how perception can vary widely, even when based on the same set of observable actions. Distance also plays a role in shaping how the situation is viewed. By physically relocating and reducing her public presence, Ellen has effectively removed herself from the immediate environment where these conversations are taking place. That separation can be seen as a way to move forward and start a new chapter, but it can also be interpreted as stepping away from scrutiny. The reality is that without direct communication, the meaning behind these choices remains open to interpretation. Silence does not confirm any specific narrative, but it does leave space for multiple narratives to exist simultaneously. And in a media landscape driven by attention and curiosity, that space is quickly filled with speculation. This is why moments like these become so significant in shaping public opinion. Not because they provide clear answers, but because they influence how existing questions are perceived. The absence of a response can be just as impactful as a statement, especially when the audience is already searching for clarity. What makes this entire situation so compelling is the fact that it doesn't have a clear ending. The Epstein case, despite years of investigation, continues to evolve. New documents emerge, old details resurface, and discussions about accountability and transparency remain ongoing. It's a story that has already revealed significant truths, yet still holds many unanswered questions. Within that larger narrative, individual moments, like Ellen's departure, become part of a broader timeline that people continue to analyze. Each new development has the potential to reshape how previous events are understood, creating a constantly shifting perspective on what may or may not be connected. At the same time, it's important to separate confirmed facts from ongoing speculation. The presence of unanswered questions does not automatically validate every theory, and the complexity of the situation requires careful consideration of what is known versus what is assumed. This balance is what keeps the discussion grounded, even as curiosity continues to drive interest. What cannot be ignored, however, is the level of attention this story continues to attract. It reflects a wider interest in understanding how power, influence, and accountability intersect in ways that are not always visible to the public. Whether through official investigations, media coverage, or independent discussions, the search for clarity remains active. As more information becomes available, if it does, the narrative may shift again. New details could confirm certain aspects while disproving others, or they may simply add more layers to an already complex situation. Until then, the story remains open-ended, shaped by both what is known and what is yet to be revealed. And that's ultimately what keeps people watching. Not just the events themselves, but the possibility that something bigger is still unfolding, something that hasn't fully come into focus yet.